My name is Joshua Dubois. My hometown is Nashville, Tennessee, is where I was raised for the most part. I'm the CEO of Values Partnerships. After college, among my most memorable experiences was even getting into grad school in the first place. I had a lot of folks telling me that I needed to take a little time off after undergrad and build some work experience, but just had an inkling that I wanted to push on through and get into the best grad school I could get into, and so hustled, man. From a work perspective, worked 3-4 jobs. Tried to get some great recommendations for grad school, and I remember very well when those letters came in and I found out that I got accepted to Princeton with a full ride. And so moved into to graduate school. That was a formative time, learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about what I wanted to do in life, and met a number of dear friends who are friends to this day in grad school. Dreamed about attending college. I would say I was probably 6 or 7 years old. My mom had just married my stepdad. We were in Newport News, Virginia, had moved there from Nashville, Tennessee. I was just dreaming big about what I wanted to be in the world and what I wanted to be both a lawyer and a football player. I wanted to be the first NFL player to have a law practice on the side during the season and even after the season. I also I was an only child at the time, but I wanted my law firm to be Dubois and Dubois. I didn't know who the other Dubois was going to be, but I knew that law firms usually had 2 names. And I thought that would be live to have Dubois and Dubois. But yeah, that was when I first dreamed about college. To 6 or 7-year-old, moving from Nashville to Newport News, Virginia. The activities that supported and influenced my dream to attend college were, first and foremost, parents, my mom and my stepdad, who, there was no margin for bad grades. We didn't have a whole lot. We were very low income, even on food stamps at time, but they never let our lack of resources get in the way of my academic achievement. And so it was always looking at the report cards, maybe get a couple bucks for an A, maybe $1 for a B+, but anything below that was just sort of unacceptable. Also, my mom signed me up for a bunch of extracurriculars. So I did something called Junior Achievement, where I got to shadow a CEO. I went to our after-school programs at our church. When we moved back to Nashville after Virginia, they put me in the lottery for a magnet school program, and I got into Meg's Magnet School, which really put me on a trajectory of academic achievement, just being in that magnet environment with other students who were high achieving as well. So those were a few things, lots of extracurricular enrollment. Oh, I should say, even before my mom married my stepdad and when she was a single mom, and I say my stepdad, but I consider him my dad, so moving forward I just say dad. When she was a single mom, she enrolled me in first grade in the Talented and Gifted program, TAG. And so, she pushed hard, went up to the school, made sure that the teachers had me in this track rather than the main track. She took off of work and she was, making just, a few bucks an hour. So it was hard for her to get out of work. But the TAG program was actually at another school. And so she left on her lunch break to pick me up from my school, bring me to the school where the TAG program was. I would be over there for an hour and a half, and then she would bring me back to my school. So just a big sacrifice, but definitely something that she thought was important. The high school I attended could best be described as subpar, and that's being generous. We moved from Nashville to Xenia, Ohio. So as you see, I moved around a bunch. And Xenia High School was not the best school in the world. Good people there, but, a lot of kids who were, at the intersection of trying to find themselves and trying to hustle. So it was a lot of drug activity, gang activity, a lot of young girls who were seeking love in the wrong places and ended up being pregnant as teens. And so a lot of negative influences, and honestly, there's a lot of influences that I allowed to influence me. Now, the helpful thing was that, again, at home, I could mess around, I could do things that took me off track, but I still was not allowed to go below a certain floor. And so whereas for some of my friends, because they didn't have parents at home who were holding them accountable, maybe they didn't have a dad in the home, or their mom was working too much to really hold them accountable, they could bring home an F or a D. I would hang out with the same people, but I knew I couldn't bring home an F or a D. I still had to be a C and above, or else I just wouldn't want to deal with the consequences. And so the high school I would definitely describe as a challenging school, a challenging time for me, but fortunately it was something that I was able to push through and then go to college after that. In high school, I was interested in football, I was interested in girls, I was interested in drama, meaning the drama class. I did a couple fall plays on the side. I didn't tell my friends about it, I would do that. And I was also interested in getting out of Ohio, meaning there was a constant push that I knew deep down I did not want to stay in Xenia, Ohio, which again is where we moved after Nashville. And so if I was going to leave, I would need to go to college. If I was going to go to college, I would need to get a scholarship because my parents couldn't afford to send me, on their own. So I was interested in a lot of things that had nothing to do with academics and that threatened to derail me. But fortunately, I was interested in really just kind of escaping into a better environment, which propelled me forward. I remember when I started getting letters from colleges, kind of random liberal arts schools around the country, like Sewanee in Tennessee and a couple places in Minnesota that I found out later were really good schools. I had never heard of them before, but that was just kind of cool to have taken my SATs or PACTs or whatever they were, and on the basis of those scores, start to receive mail. I mean, as a teenager, as a 14-year-old, 15-year-old, I was young. I had skipped a grade, so I was younger than my peers. You don't get mail, period. There's not a whole lot of things addressed to you. And so when you look at an envelope and it has the name of a college on the front of this big envelope and it's addressed to Joshua Dubois, like that was big. Just to even receive that was it was a proud moment. I was proud of playing football. I played with my thumb broken for a whole game one time. It's like one of those stories that you tell your grandkids about and you probably make up half of it, but that piece happens to be true. So I was proud of playing football. I was proud. I have much younger siblings, and so my little sister was born when I was a senior in high school, and I was proud of the time that I was able to spend with her. The most difficult thing that happened to me in high school really was probably trying to figure out if I was going to be cool and if I was going to be down or if I was going to achieve. It was a pretty stark decision, and I made the wrong one most of the time. But there, just a constant pressure, and I felt like I was just one decision away from, from not being able to sit in front of this camera today, not being able to go on to college and grad school and to my occupations that I've held. Really the most difficult piece was just grappling with temptation every day. Temptation to both use and sell drugs, temptation to, become a parent at that time, way before I would have been ready. I was suspended for fighting after a football practice one day. I got a 10-day suspension. And it was just out of character. It was not something that an honor roll student should have been doing. It was a complicated situation, but nothing justified getting into a physical altercation. And then to have to put, at that time, I don't know if they still do it, but at that time on your college applications, they asked the question, have you ever been suspended or expelled from school? And so to have to check yes there, and then they give you a few lines where you provide an explanation, and then I think I enclosed another letter explaining it, and then that sense of uncertainty about whether that was going to impact admission to college and scholarships and so forth was just a terrible feeling, particularly between the time I had to check that box and the time that I got some decisions back. And so that was definitely challenging, both the altercation itself and my suspension, and having to tell my mom and dad, and they had to drive. They were away at the time in Cincinnati. They had to drive back to Xenia and kind of deal with the situation. And then the future ramifications. It was something I definitely thought about, even all the way through grad school. I think in my grad school applications, I had to put something about that as well. And so that was definitely a steps I took to prepare for college. One, I just did not let, even with all the craziness going on in my life, I did not let my grades fall below a certain point. I knew intrinsically, even without thinking about it, that I needed to have a 3.0 or above. And so I was mindful of that and cognizant of that. I also overcompensated with a couple AP classes because they were graded on a different scale. And so a 4.0 would be a 5.0, or honors classes they were, I guess. And so I took those intentionally. I was pretty careful about ACT prep. It was in the Midwest, so we took the ACT rather than the SAT, and so I spent a fair amount of time getting ready for that. And I think I knocked my essay out of the park. I really carefully, taking a step back, one of the most important things I did to prepare for college and started early on is I just read all the time. Whether it was at dinner or with the flashlight underneath my blanket at night, I always had a book in my hand. And there's something about reading that both expands your academic success and your vocabulary, but also makes you a better writer. And so because I read all the time, when it was time to write college essays, when it was time to fill out these applications, I had the words to say, I had the words to use. And so I think that was a key. What I remember most about college was the application process and going to college was first, I thought I wanted to go to the armed services. I took a test called the ASVAB, the Armed Services Vocational Ability Battery, I believe it was, and I had scored out of the park on it, did really, really well. The recruiters came to our house. They had the forms. I was about to sign on the dotted line. Then they got to the end of the interview and they asked, oh, by the way, how old are you? I was like, 15. So apparently I left that piece out, that I had skipped 8th grade, and so I was younger than I was required to be at that time. And so they were like, you're wasting my time. You got to come back when you're about to be 18 or whatever the cutoff was. And so they left. Fortunately, that, although I have great respect for the armed services, it probably wasn't the best pathway for me. And so I didn't move in that direction. Did apply for schools though. I think that the most important piece about the application process for me was I wanted as many options as possible. And so I had a lot of friends that applied for 2 schools or 3 schools. And I was broke and we didn't have a lot of money as a family. And so, even that $40 or $50 application fee was a hustle. But I said, you know what, that $50 for each school opens up this entirely new set of possibilities, this new region in the country where I could go, this new major I could study. And so accumulating as many of those $50 fees as possible is among the best money that I could spend. So I was working at Perkins Restaurant at the time. I was a waiter, and just put all of my tip money into application fees. And so I ended up applying for 10 schools. So spent about $500, but it was hugely important because although I didn't get into all of them, I got into a lot of them, and it gave me a lot of options, a lot of different schools to consider, different regions of the country that I could consider, different scholarship offers that I could consider. And so that was really important. Speaking of scholarship offers, it was a little bit of a fork in the road. I got into the University of Dayton, which was about 20 minutes from my home. I got the presidential scholarship or whatever, so it was a full ride plus housing plus a stipend, a cash stipend on top of that. So it was like, for somebody that didn't have a whole lot, that was hugely persuasive offer. But then I got into Boston University, which I got some scholarship money, got some support, but wasn't as robust as the other offer. And my mom was like, you're going to UD, you're going to University of Dayton. There's no way you can turn down an offer like that. But, something in me wanted to be in a big city. I wanted to be kind of out on my own, a little bit away from my parents at the time, although I certainly loved them. I decided I wanted to go to Boston and cause a little tension, a little beef in the household there. But it was, I think, an important decision. Biggest fears about attending college were, one, I was younger than a lot of other people. Was I think 16 when I got in. I was just turning 17, and so I wasn't even adult yet technically in terms of being 18 or above. And so I think just navigating that as a younger student, I think was a fear. Also just kind of fearful that I don't think my character was fully developed at the time. And so in terms of temptations along the lines of drugs, alcohol, sex, yada, yada, they, I think, were more acute and less figured out for me than they would be for kids who were older, or who, had a little bit of a stronger sense of themselves. And so I don't think I went to college with a great sense of myself. I think I found myself throughout college and then into grad school as well. But it was a slower process. So I think those were some fears. Yeah, what I remember most about freshman year of college was, meeting good friends, trying to figure out the social scene, picking classes that were all on like 2 or 3 days a week, so I could have have a 4 or 5 day weekend or something absurd like that. Trying to load up my Tuesdays and Thursdays from like 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. so I could have Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays free to either work or kick it or do whatever. Met some good friends, some dear friends who are still my friends to this day, trying to figure out the party scene and just basically not that focused on academics my freshman year. I definitely woke up towards the end of my sophomore year and got on track. But freshman year was a time where I'm much more interested in, the right party to go to in Allston, Brighton, which is a neighborhood in Boston where we would hang out on the weekends rather than, making sure my grades were on point. So I was hustling the entire time in college. I was there without a full scholarship, although I did end up applying for a scholarship called the Augustus Howe Buck Scholarship that I got. That was a full ride when I was in my sophomore year going into my junior year. But before that, and even after that, my parents didn't have money to send me for spending money, anything like that. And so I was working. I took the Green Line train from BU, from Boston University, to the end of the Green Line by Boston College, and worked pretty much every day my freshman and sophomore year at Craftmatic Beds selling adjustable beds, which was crazy. I was there with a bunch of middle-aged people, and I'm a teenager in there on the phone selling beds. I did a bunch of, our school had this service called Quickie Jobs where people in Boston could hire a college student to do random jobs. And so, I raked people's yards. I organized this one guy's library. The funniest quickie job was the Jewish community during high holy days when they were staying in hotels in Boston. They're not allowed to create energy. That's a part of the religion. And so I was what's called a Shabbos Goyim, which means my job was to go to the hotel and press the elevator buttons and turn on people's lights because they were not allowed to create energy themselves. And so I was hired, for $50 for the day to just basically be there and press the elevator buttons for Orthodox folks from the Jewish community who were following the tenets of their religion. Also worked for a classics magazine on campus called Orion. Hustled there. I started there just as basically an intern, and I convinced him to give me the title of marketing coordinator. So I sent the publication around to bookstores around the country when they hadn't been in bookstores before, and created a consignment agreement where if they sold at the store, the publication would get paid. And so one common theme was when I got in the door somewhere, I tried to make my platform and title as big as possible, even if it didn't start that way. So I really tried to hustle once I got into these places, not just hustling to get there. In terms of getting the scholarship my sophomore year, it was actually something a professor saw in me rather than me hustling. Although I did have to turn in the application, I was doing well in one class. It was a class that I was interested in. It was about the classics. It was called Core Curriculum. And so, we were reading Aristotle and Voltaire and John Locke and stuff like that. And really invested in the class, was interested in it. The professor said, hey, there's a scholarship called the Augustus Howe Buck Scholarship, full tuition for kids who are interested in the classics and in, the great literature of Western tradition. Would you want to apply for it? And he pushed hard for me to get it. And I filled out the application and followed up. But it was really, this was one of the few professors that I would go to their office hours and spend time with them. And so, it underscored for me the importance of knowing that your teachers and your professors are people too, and then if you invest in them, they're more likely to invest in you. Some of my most memorable experiences were both finding my faith and finding my passion for social justice. I grew up in the church, but I wasn't really a practicing Christian myself. I thought I knew everything about religion and didn't like it because I didn't like the politics of it. I didn't like, all of the bureaucracy associated with the church that I knew. And I also was not involved in terms of social justice. I wasn't in NAACP. I wasn't in, Black Student Union stuff, nothing like that. I was just kind of doing me, working, partying, trying to get decent grades, try to talk to girls, etc. One day I was actually working at Craftmatic Beds, and I forget if it was the radio or television, but I heard this on a news report, this case about this young black man in New York named Amadou Diallo, who had been shot 41 times by police officers simply because they asked him for his ID and he pulled out his wallet to show the ID. They thought the wallet was a gun and they shot him, and they didn't stop shooting until 41 bullets had been released from their weapons. And for some reason, I don't know what it was, because I'd heard other bad cases before, heard other things before that should have disturbed me, but that one just like upset me. And so I started following the case and just kind of getting on the internet and trying to learn more about it. And I was hopeful that, when it went to trial, that, there would be a conviction, that somebody would be held responsible for the death of this man, of Mr. Diallo. And I was also at work, Craftmatic, one day when the news reports came in that the officers who shot him were acquitted on all charges. And I don't know what it was, but that was just devastating for me. Just this notion. I was thinking about, what if that was me and that was my mom and somebody killed her son and there was just no recompense for it, no sense of justice, and it just broke my heart. And so I decided to, I didn't know what to do. Again, I wasn't involved in government, wasn't involved with political organizations, but I decided to just write Amadou Diallo's name on a piece of poster board, and I decided to stand in Marsh Plaza, which was the middle of our school, for 41 hours, 1 hour for each shot that was directed at Mr. Diallo. And my friends, who were not not the smart kids, they thought I was bugging out, and so they were like, "Yo, what are you doing? This is ridiculous." After about 5 hours, I was ready to quit. But then, a few other people came by and encouraged me and was like, "Yo, tell me more about Amadou." And so I got to talk to them about the case. I could see it was building some sort of awareness. So I just stood out there. And before you knew it, it sort of gained some momentum. It never got more than like 20 people, but people were kind of coming around. And I thought, man, you can, when you take a bold step, people can notice, and that can expand people's consciousness. The same time, one of the people who stopped by, who I'd never met before, when I was protesting, was this cat named Eugene Schneeberg. And Eugene was a kind of big man on campus. He knew everybody, but I didn't really know him. He was like, "Yo, I love what you're doing. I want to invite you to my church. If you really want to know about this world that we live in, where there's injustice, and how to find real justice, you should come to my church." I'm like, "Man, I know all about Christianity. I know all about that already." He's like, "No, just come and check it out." So I wrapped up the protest, and a couple weeks later, I took Eugene up on his offer to go to church, and really found my faith in Jesus Christ for myself in that period. It was a tiny little church, 2 people in the choir. It met in a middle school auditorium. It wasn't like the big mega churches I had been to, but the message that was preached there was more personal than what I'd heard. It wasn't about success and money or bureaucracy and politics. It was just about my relationship with God and God's relationship and love for me. And so that was something that I responded to, and eventually became an associate pastor at that church with Eugene. And so really kind of around that same moment, around this galvanizing moment of Amadou Diallo, I became aware of the world around me from a social perspective, and aware of my faith at the same time. Yeah, so I was wrapping up graduate school at Princeton, trying to figure out if I was going to go into politics, maybe go into ministry, just wasn't sure. I was doing an internship in DC in between my first and second years in grad school. By the way, grad school, I worked at the local congressman's office in New Jersey when they didn't let me work for grad school. I picked up another internship in New York. I always did one extra thing, one extra role that wasn't, even if you weren't supposed to be working. I'm like, I'm young. I'm younger than most other cats. I was young going into college. I'm young because I didn't take time off between college and grad school. So my resume needs to be tighter than other people's because I don't have a lot of formal job experiences. And so I did a bunch of different stuff while I was in graduate school to build out my resume, even outside of the classroom. I sacrificed a little bit in terms of classroom and homework time, and so I don't necessarily recommend it, but for me it worked out. I was doing an internship in Washington, trying to figure out what's going on. Look up one day, I'm having a burger at a restaurant here, and I see this young state senator, not even elected to the United States Senate yet, named Barack Obama, and he's giving a speech at the 2004 Democratic National Convention. And I'm like, man, this dude is ripping it up. He's talking about issues that I care about. I like the way the crowd is responding to him. And then he started talking about his faith. He said something about the awesome God that we serve in the blue states. I'm like, here's a Democrat, a progressive, a justice-oriented cat who also has a strong faith. And I'm like, man, I got to work for this dude. And so I wrote his office a letter, his campaign a letter, said that I wanted to work for him, and I got a form letter rejection in response. In fact, I have it right here. So this is October 16th, 2004, a letter from Obama for Illinois. Thank you for your interest in working for Senator Barack Obama. We've received many resumes of highly qualified individuals. We'll keep them on file, but basically a rejection letter. And so I was like, man, I could just leave it at that. I had another job offer in New York that would have paid me a lot more money than working for the senator that nobody knew he was going to be president. But something in me was like, no, you got to go after this. And so I drove down to Washington, D.C. To his office at the time and just asked if I could get an interview. They basically said no, because you don't just show up at people's office. They're like, nah, you can't get an interview. So I went back up to New Jersey, drove down again a second time a couple weeks later, just because I was hard-headed, and asked if I could get an interview. They told me they agreed to finally set me up with somebody in the office. I had a great conversation. I'm feeling good, and thinking I'm going to get a job. I was driving back up, and I Googled the person they set me up with. Turns out it's the IT guy, so they basically played me. And so I used that as leverage to email the legislative director, and was basically like, I've been down there twice now, would love at least a genuine phone conversation. I think I've got a lot to offer you. And the LD, the legislative director, Chris Liu, responded and said, okay, let's get on the phone. I got one job available. It's a legislative correspondent. The pay is $28,000 a year. But if you're interested, you would be a strong candidate. Now I'm coming out of Princeton. My classmates are making $100,000, not $120,000, $140,000. I've got another job offer in New York at $95,000 a year. It's a nonprofit, but it's a senior role at a nonprofit. And this guy is offering me $28,000, but the opportunity to work for Barack Obama. And I talked to some friends and prayed about it. Mom's was like, yo, you better take that New York job, but I just had a gut sense that this is where I should be. So I went down, did a final interview, and took the job with Barack Obama in early 2000. I started working for Senator Obama. I was a junior staffer, just kind of at the bottom of the totem pole. But a few things I think were important in that time. One, I really took the time to do even the small stuff well. I was a legislative correspondent, which meant I sent letters to constituents who wrote Senator Obama. And every letter I sent back, I tried to make sure it was quality, it was excellent. And that, if that letter happened to be in the press, or if that one happened to be passed on to the senator, that it would be tight, and that at least my name wasn't going to be associated with anything that wasn't quality. And so I think that was important, and I think that was noticed over time. But also, I think, some strategic boldness. There was a time where Senator Obama asked, he said he wanted to do a speech on faith, and he kind of asked people in the office and our chief of staff, is anyone interested in faith out here? And I raised my hand. I said, absolutely I am. And, I'd love to work on this with you. So I was able to work with him on that speech. Also, there were some mentors in that office that poured into me. And so again, just like teachers in college, investing in older people with more experience, and they will invest back into you. In 2006 and 2007, I did something crazy bold. I was and still am serious about my faith. And I thought, one morning, man, I read a devotional every morning. Wouldn't it be cool if I could send Senator Obama a little piece of scriptural reflection to start his day? And I was bold enough, to make a long story short, to get his personal email address from his body man, Reggie Love, and send him an email, knowing that it could possibly get me fired, or not knowing how he would respond to it. And I remember that first email well, and sent it off to his BlackBerry. And he wrote back and said, "I love this. Would you do this every day?" And so that led to a personal relationship between me and him. I didn't know him that well at first, but that sort of deepened over time. I was hired on the campaign to lead our religious affairs and mobilizing people of faith around the country to vote for Senator Obama in 2008. That went well. And so again, after Election Day in 2008, there was a question about whether a Democratic administration would have an office for the faith community. That had never been tested before. Republicans had one. Would a Democrat have one? And I took the risk to email this president-elect directly and say, "Sir, lots of different arguments here. A lot of people are saying we shouldn't have this, but here's why I think we should have it, and I'd like to run it for you." And he agreed, and he said, "Yes, I'd love to have you do it." It also was, I think, a bit of risk on his part that he took, not just with me, but with others. He's someone that really believes in investing in young leadership. I was 24 on the campaign, 26 in the White House. His chief speechwriter, John Favreau, was my same age. A lot of different people. His deal was, if you can do the work, I'm not going to give you an extra credit because you're young, but I'm also not going to knock you for it. And he was really open to cultivating young leadership, which I think was an important quality. Time in the White House was thrilling. It was very challenging, long hours, but deeply rewarding as well. I remember wonderful moments like traveling up the side of a mountain to meet with President Obama and Billy Graham, and just the small group in Billy Graham's living room while they're praying for each other there, which was just deeply powerful. I also remember really challenging moments, like the president asked me to go with him after the Newtown tragedy, where 20 elementary school students and 6 teachers were killed. And so to be there with him in that moment, to try to be a support to them and the people who lost their lives was heartbreaking. From civil rights to racial justice to religion, to have a front row seat to history, it was just a really unique time. I always felt extraordinarily blessed to be in that space at this particular time in our country. But I probably didn't spend even enough time reflecting on how important it was. I was just there to do work, to put in the hours to achieve what I'm supposed to achieve for this president and for the country. But those were a few times that stood out to me. After about 4 years in the White House, after the first term, and after the president, I wanted to make sure he was reelected, and did some work on that as well. I decided, God has some other things out there for me. So I decided that I may want to think about writing a book, pulling together some of the devotionals that I sent President Obama every day, along with some essays about my time in the White House. I asked the president if he thought it was a good idea, and he said, "Absolutely, do it." And so developed this book with his support called The President's Devotional, the daily readings that inspired President Obama. And so I was able to put that book together and launch it out into the world. And then I started a company, Values Partnerships. I realized that there were a lot of entities out there, whether foundations or nonprofits or private companies or entertainment companies that would want to partner with communities of faith or communities of color on the work that they're doing, but they don't necessarily know how. And so I with my wife, Michelle, who was then my fiance when we left, she left government as well, and we started this firm that creates these partnerships between secular institutions like foundations and private companies and communities of faith or communities of color so that they can work on projects together. And so that's what we've been doing for the last few years. A professional day today can best be described as jam-packed. We have some wonderful clients that we love, from Gates Foundation, the Paramount Pictures, and A&E Networks, and we help them build broad public engagement campaigns to bring the African American community or the faith community into their work. And so, we may have a call about how to communicate to African Americans on social media and then implement that work. I may be reviewing a trailer for a movie and making sure that it's aligned well with the communities that the movie wants to reach. I may be hosting a screening for a project, a movie or a television project, or responding to and editing scripts for a project, or on the phone with a foundation leader walking through how communities of faith can impact public health or childhood obesity or gun violence. Dream is to remove the barriers, to remove the obstacles, and think about what you could do if you just had a wide open road in front of you. Even though every day you're going to wake up and there's going to be something in your way, a hurdle, when you close your eyes and dream, you can remove all those things and just dream and just think big. And that's what I think. To believe is to hold on to something that's bigger than yourself, some broader sense of purpose. For me, it's my faith. It's my faith in God. But for other people, they believe in other things. To believe is to attach something to something that's larger than just yourself. To achieve is to work. Is to get up in the morning and be disciplined enough to have a list in front of you and to grind it out, to realize that achievement isn't sexy. It's not glitz and glam. It's hard work. It's elbow grease. If I was giving advice to the younger me, I would say give everybody the benefit of the doubt. Don't write people off because of what you heard about them or who they are or where they're from. Open up and develop and cultivate relationships. Also, don't worry too much about what people think. That ultimately, most people aren't thinking about you, and those that do don't matter. What I hope to achieve in the next 5 to 10 years is, first and foremost, raise a healthy and happy son, and maybe even more kids by that time. But to be a good dad, to spend time after school and extracurriculars really pouring into my kids. I hope to be a disciplined manager of my finances and my company, and hope to be a good husband as well, and for the people that know me best to respect me the most.